Hi, everyone. I'm Adam Wise, and welcome to our workshop on Azure Cost Management. Specifically today, we will be covering the Microsoft Learn module, Analyze Costs and Create Budgets with Azure Cost Management. To give you a little bit of background on myself, I am a program manager on the Azure Cost Management team. I've had a hand in various features across the cost management stack, and super excited to present some of the things that we have for you in the Azure portal today and to kind of go through this module. So as I'm going through today, this module is actually located in an Azure Cost Management learning path that we've created for you all that has multiple modules that you all can go through at your leisure. So you can actually get to this Learn module by accessing aka.ms/costmgmt/learn, and that will take you to this module here. So as you can see, some of the additional modules that we have here, we've got one on cost optimization. We've got one on predicting costs and optimizing your spending in Azure. We've got the module that we'll be covering today on analyzing costs and creating budgets with Azure Cost Management. And then we have an additional module on saving money with Azure Reserved Instances. So I would recommend opening up this module if you haven't yet, and I'll be kind of going through this and kind of discussing the content in here and demoing it as well for you guys in the portal. If you do have your own Azure account, I would recommend logging into the portal now and trying to follow along as I discuss some of the content here. So let's go ahead and get started. So let me switch over here. Alrighty, so today, as I go through this module, the agenda of things I'll be discussing. First off, I'll be going through some best practices that we like to share with customers as they're thinking about cost management for their organization. From there, I'll go into some of the key tenets of our cost management lifecycle, which include visibility. So that's sort of understanding where are my costs coming from in my organization, whether that's what resources are driving various costs that might be being accrued. It might be what teams are accruing various resources. So getting a good idea of, what's on your bill and what's driving those costs. The next tenet of cost management is accountability. So once you've gotten a good idea of where your costs are coming from, the next step is to sort of set up various aspects within cost management, which I'll be discussing a little bit later, to allow teams to be held accountable for the costs that they are accruing in Azure. And then the last step is sort of taking advantage of various benefits that Azure offers and also analyzing your environments to see what sort of configuration changes that you can do in order to optimize those costs moving forward. So now getting into some of the best practices. So some of the things that I like to talk about first when you're approaching cost management as an organization is planning upfront. So this is incredibly important to making sure that your costs don't spin out of control in Azure. Think about the costs and the resources that you're spinning up in the cloud as sort of like the lights in your home. When you have those lights on and you leave the house, that's going to be wasting you money. And so you want to think about, it's very easy to flip on the switch, but you should subsequently be thinking about how you can be, turning off those resources, turning off the lights when you leave, making sure that you're not wasting things. Also, maybe there are more efficient bulbs that you could be using. And so just kind of thinking about it from that perspective up front can be very helpful in sort of seeding how you approach building out an environment. And so kind of some of the aspects of planning that you want to look into up front are first understanding how Azure's billing model works. So as I sort of brought up this light bulb analogy, Azure resources are sort of, once you spin them up, they begin accruing costs. And so the way billing works is you've got a resource, let's say a virtual machine, and that resource might have 1 or even 5 meters which are associated with the resource. And the meters themselves are sort of the base units that are accruing cost over time. So as that VM is on, each one of those meters on an hourly basis is sort of emitting the usage that they are accruing on the resource, which then subsequently gets billed. So for example, if you've spun up a VM, you might have meters associated with the compute on that VM, so the processing that's running, the networking on that VM, so the outbound and inbound communications that are being sent over the wire, along with the storage on that VM. So if you have a bunch of programs that are running, an OS, all of that is being stored, and that storage is another subsequent cost that will accrue over time. Another thing to think about, now that you sort of have an idea of how this billing system works, is what are the different factors, the big factors that can affect the costs of my resources. And so two big ones to think about are the SKU. And so the SKU of a resource, for example, all SQL databases are not created the same. So you can spin up one SQL database and that might cost you $100 a month, or you could even spin up one that costs several $1,000s a month. So it's very important to understand what SKU am I using when you're creating the resources in order to have a good idea of what that bottom line cost will be. Because the last thing you want is to spin up a resource, because spinning up an $1,000 SQL machine is about as easy as it is to spin up a $100 SQL machine. So it's very important to be thinking about what SKU that you want to use for your workloads. The next aspect to consider is what region you're spinning that resource up in. So pricing varies based on the region, and also one thing to think about is based on how your workload might be architected. Certain regions, if you're communicating with resources that are out of the region that the one resource is in, that will accrue more cost than if you're from a networking perspective than if you're communicating all within the same region. So it's a good idea if you've got services that are talking to each other to, where possible, try to co-locate those resources within the same region. So the next aspect of planning that I like to discuss is estimating your costs. And so that's, if you have some idea for a service that you want to create, actually try to think through what are all of the resources that I'll need to create and how much might each of those resources cost from, on a monthly basis based off of the needs of my workload. And for that, we have a tool available for you that I'll be demoing in a little bit called the Azure Pricing Calculator. So before I demo that, I'll discuss the last aspect of planning here. And so that's sort of trying to think about how you architect Azure in order to maximize the insights that you can have into the costs that are accruing. So, within Azure, you can spin up resources within a subscription and a resource group. And so thinking about how you might want to organize those resources so that, you can see, okay, what does this cost in this resource group mean as opposed to the cost in this subscription, can be very helpful for you to be able to have easier analysis in the future on the costs. So for example, some teams like to allocate a subscription per workload or a subscription per team. Another thing that you could think about is a resource group per workload or team, and thinking about how you want to do that, or that organization of your resources up front will allow you to have kind of an easier time analyzing things in the future. The next thing also to think about is creating a tagging structure for your various resources. So all resources in Azure have the ability to be tagged. And so the great thing in cost management that those tags offer is, specifically, let's say I've got a workload in the portal and let's say it's using a SQL database, but there are several other teams that are using that same database. A shared resource like this might be a great thing to tag as a shared resource, so then you can understand what are the costs for, and divvy up those costs across the team based on that tag. And so tags are sort of a great example of when you've got multiple teams sharing a single resource, that's contributing to various workloads. So those are some of the key aspects of planning. And before I move on to the next section, where I'll briefly be discussing the Azure pricing calculator and showing you how to utilize that, I'd like to sort of just make sure that you all are aware that feel free to ask questions as you're going along. We've got moderators from my team who will be able to answer them kind of as they come up. Also, I'll take a second here to see if there's any questions that they want me to answer at this point. Looks like no. So yeah. So now I'm going to go and begin demoing how you can sort of assess a workload and estimate the cost of that workload. So here I've got a workload, an example workload, and so we've got an application gateway, 2 virtual machines, which are both talking to an Azure SQL database. So let's go ahead and see how we can assess how much this workload might cost. So I'm going to switch over to the Azure portal here. Or sorry, not the Azure portal, the Azure pricing calculator. So Azure offers a great tool called the Azure pricing calculator, which allows you to input various resources associated with a workload and estimate what that monthly cost might be at various different configurations of the workload. So you can see here that you have the ability to choose between various resources. And so I'm going to sort of go ahead and make an estimation or attempt to create an estimate on the workload that I had just shown you all. So this workload, we've got 2 virtual machines here. So I'll go ahead and I'll add 1 virtual machine. Also, before I move on, one thing I want to mention, you can access the pricing calculator by either Googling Azure pricing calculator, or you can go to azure.com. And then under pricing, you can access the pricing calculator here. Okay, so I've added 1 virtual machine to my pricing calculator estimate. I'm going to go ahead and add another one here. And then let's go ahead and add that SQL database. And then let's add the gateway. Alrighty, so I scroll down here. And you can see, let's see, bunch of virtual machines. All right, looks like I accidentally added too many virtual machines here, so I'm going to go ahead and remove 2 of these. So you can see here now that these are the various resources that I've added and they've sort of been pre-seeded with a certain SKU of machine. And so you can see here that it's looking like my estimated monthly cost for just the out-of-the-box estimate that's been created for me is $1,700. So let's drill in here a little bit and see what we can do to maybe alter some of the pricing here. So I'll open up some of these virtual machines here. You can see some of the various aspects here that are shown, such as the region, what operating system you want, and then what SKU you want to use. So this is, as you can see, the type of SKU that you choose has a pretty big impact on the dollars per hour that you'll be spending on the machine. So let's go ahead. It looks like I'm currently at a 20 cents an hour workload. Let's try switching this to, let's see. I think I need a little bit more beefy of a machine, so I'm going to switch this to a 50 cent an hour. So you can see here that has now been reflected, and it's doing the estimate based off of the number of hours in the month. So it's assuming sort of that this machine will be on at all times in the month. One thing I want to call out here is that this pricing calculator is sort of showing you some optimizations that can actually be made up front when considering this virtual machine. So there's sort of some options in terms of what you can save with when you're spinning up this resource. And so specifically, there's the option, as you can see, to purchase what's called an Azure Reservation. And so an Azure Reservation is a purchase benefit where you essentially are paying for an entire year's worth or 3 years worth of a VM upfront, and in exchange for that upfront purchase, you can get a significant savings discount on top of the pay-as-you-go pricing that would normally be in effect. So as you can see, if I were to take a 1-year reservation, for example, for this machine, I could get as much as a 39% discount for the machine. Another thing to note here is that there also is the ability to utilize what's called Azure Hybrid Benefit. And so if you work for a large organization and let's say your organization has, Windows licenses available that can be transferred to the cloud, Azure Hybrid Benefit is sort of the ability to take those licenses that are already owned by your organization and apply them to machines that are in the cloud. And so as you see, if I were to, let's say I switch to a 1-year reservation and then I include the hybrid benefit, my costs here have actually dropped down to $125 a month. That's a pretty substantial benefit here. So yeah, this is sort of just giving you an idea of, some of the different things that you could play around with in this pricing calculator to get a better idea of how much that workload might cost. One thing about reservations I just want to call out, and I'll be discussing that a little bit more in the future, is that when considering whether or not to purchase a reservation, it's important that you have an idea of how permanent this workload will be. So you typically only want to purchase a reservation if you know that that workload will be around for a while. So in this case, either a year or 3 years. If this is just sort of a development prototype that you might spin up a VM, test something out, and then delete the VM later, a reservation probably wouldn't be the right scenario for you there. Another thing I want to call out is that there are additional, this is sort of the in-depth analysis of the compute and the licensing costs, but there are additional costs that will be accrued with this VM as it is running. So for example, disks, storage transactions, and networking bandwidth are additional costs, and each one of those would correspond to, as I had mentioned earlier, an Azure meter, which is sort of emitting usage and cost over time. One thing I want to call out as well, and we have a lot of customers that have had problems with this over the years. Let's say you've spun up a resource like a VM in Azure and you subsequently go and delete that resource. Just because you've deleted the VM itself does not necessarily mean that the storage disk is also deleted. So it's a good idea to make sure that you're sort of doing that due diligence if you are going and deleting VMs, to also make sure that the corresponding disk is getting deleted as well, because that a lot of times can it will accrue cost for you moving forward if it is not deleted. So this is sort of looking in depth at the virtual machine, but you can see here, this is sort of some of the process that you might want to follow when you are going through and making an estimate. Let me pause here for a quick second and just want to point out again, if folks have any questions, please feel free to ask. We've got moderators that will be answering those. Alrighty, so now I'm going to jump back to the presentation. Alrighty, so now that we've kind of learned a little bit about the planning process for cost management, I want to discuss the kind of iterative cost management process as well that you want to engage in across all of the various stakeholders in your organization. And so when we think of stakeholders and who can kind of benefit from using cost management, there's sort of three main personas. We've got management personas. So these are people who maybe, they're the head of a division within an organization. They've been allocated a certain amount of budget for various solutions that are being developed by various different teams. These are people who might, benefit from looking at a little bit more of a top-down view of the costs within Azure, and making sure that their organization is accountable to various budgets that might have been granted to them by the finance department. Speaking about finance, finance is also another role that can benefit from Azure Cost Management, and specifically, if you're in a large organization, the finance people similarly would benefit by looking at things from the same top-down perspective that the management might be looking at, but this time trying to figure out from the whole organization's perspective, how are things trending across the various divisions that that manager might be responsible for. And the last persona is the actual app teams themselves. These are the people that are actually working in the portal and developing solutions on top of those resources. And these are, these people might actually be spinning up the resources themselves and making those changes. And similarly, these people should be looking at Azure specifically and using cost management specifically to make sure that the workloads that they've spun up are not sort of getting out of control in terms of costs. So the three main tenets now of cost management that we'll be discussing are visibility, accountability, and optimization. And each one of these tenets of cost management has tools that are available for you all to use in the portal in order to assist you with that, that element. So from the aspect of visibility, we've got two tools that are available to you. One is called cost analysis. So this is a tool that allows you to slice and dice your costs on an ongoing basis and sort of see for this given resource group, how much are how much cost am I accruing? Maybe you want to group things within that resource group in order to see, what various resources themselves are accruing cost. And then another tool that we have available for you is exports. This is a recommended tool that we have if you're looking to sort of get the raw data that is behind the cost and the raw charges from the meters themselves, so that you can sort of go and slice and dice that data and maybe even ingest it into your own systems. And so this is a tool where essentially you can schedule a recurrent data dump to an Azure storage account that will essentially have all of the usage records for whatever period of time you've configured in the export that can then be analyzed, whether that's in Excel or maybe they can be uploaded into Power BI or ingested into various systems of your own. The next element of cost management is accountability. And so that is, for that, we have a budgets feature for you. And so this allows various personas, whether you're finance or a manager or an app team, to set thresholds for spending for for example a resource group or a subscription that can then proactively track that spending and alert various stakeholders when you are sort of approaching that threshold. And so I'll be demoing and discussing budgets a little bit more for you all in the future also. Then the last element that we have in the cost optimization process is optimization. And so that is, for that, we have two tools available for you in the portal that I'll be discussing today. We've got Azure Advisor. And so that's a recommendation-based tool where we actually provide you with suggestions on what are various changes that you can make to your environments or purchases that you can make in order to optimize your costs moving forward. And then also we've got Azure Reservations, which I had briefly discussed earlier, and I'll be going into a little bit more depth later. So now, before I move on to the next slide, I'll take a moment and again, if folks have any questions, I can answer those, or I can answer those if some of my moderators post them for me, or they'll be answered directly by the moderators as well. So let me just flip back to the Learn module that you all are following along. So at this point, we've sort of covered the main cost management principles. And if you all want to take a second, fill out some of these knowledge checks, we can then move on to the next step. So I'll give you guys about 10 seconds or so, fill out this quiz here, and then we can continue on with the presentation. Alrighty, So now let's get into the discussion on visibility. And so I'll be discussing how to use cost analysis and also how to use exports in order to gain more visibility into your costs. So the first thing is, how do you find cost management? And so there's several ways to do that. The first of which is you can actually click on the cost management and billing service, which I have that highlighted up here, but that can also be found via all services or by searching within the portal, or you can access it via the subscriptions themselves. One thing I just want to call out is if you actually hover over the cost management and billing icon, you can see here some links to some of the MS Learn modules that we have for you on training that is available for you. So all of these are available in that learning path that I had mentioned before, and specifically the one that we're going over today is this Analyze Costs and Create Budgets with Azure Cost Management module. Also want to point out the useful links that are at the bottom here. We've got a link to sort of an overview of cost management and billing, along with a link to a quick start, which discusses how to use the cost analysis tool. Additionally, we also have a link to our ACM YouTube channel. And so this is where we have various videos that actually walk through some of the various features that I'm going to be discussing today for you. So for example, we've got some quick start videos for you. We've got videos all about how to configure cost management, and so that kind of goes towards the planning aspect that I just discussed previously. We've also got various videos on gaining visibility into your costs, enforcing accountability, and optimizing those costs. So this is sort of a great resource that has a bunch of videos that are sort of there to help you in your your journey as you all try to maintain good stewardship from a cost perspective on these environments. So to move into cost analysis, so here I'm looking at cost analysis from the subscription view. So we've got a subscription here, and you can see some of the cost management features here are available for you right directly from the main subscription blade. So I'm going to sort of do a quick overview of some of the things that you're seeing here within this cost analysis view, and then I'll sort of show you some of the functionality that's available as well to you as you're going forward. And again, if you all have any questions, feel free to ask them into in the Teams chat, and moderators should be able to answer those. Additionally, if a question comes up later, feel free to send an email to azurecostmgmt@microsoft.com. So going into cost analysis here. So you can see that the first thing I want to talk about when discussing cost analysis is sort of how you're looking at the costs. And so the idea of a scope is very important in our cost management lifecycle. And so this is the cost management process. And so this is essentially what bucket of data is being analyzed in this particular tool. And so, for example, this is a particular subscription that I've selected. And so these are all of the costs that I'm in this tool. I'm analyzing all of the costs that are specific to that subscription. But if I wanted to switch to a different subscription, I could use this scope picker in order to change what I'm looking at. Another thing, okay, so yeah, let me just discuss kind of what is on the screen here. So you've got here a summary of the total cost that you've accrued thus far this month, along with what you're looking at is sort of an accumulated view of how that cost is accruing over time. I've also here got a budget that is sort of showing how your cost is accruing against this budget. One thing that I would love to know, though, is when would I actually breach this budget? And so one thing that would be great, or that you can use in this tool, is actually we have a forecast for you that shows you whether or not you will breach this budget. And in general, whether you're looking at a budget or not, it can be very useful to see what are the potential costs that you're going to be accruing in the future. So as you can see here, it looks like by the end of the month, I'm projected to accrue around $1,900 in cost, which is just under that budget that I've set here, which is awesome. Another thing I would just want to call out, we've got some donut charts here on the bottom for you that provide sort of a quick pivot on some of the various dimensions that are associated with your cost. And so when I say dimension, that's sort of a metadata type aspect of the cost. So for example, you've got a $2 charge, or what are the various aspects that you might be associated with that charge. And so you can see here, those dimensions can actually be accessed and used via a filtering functionality that this tool has. And so here you can see some of the dimensions that are associated with these charges. For example, the location, or the resource, or the resource group name. And so this can be sort of a great way to drill in to see, a subset of the cost within this particular subscription. So I'm going to go ahead, and it looks like, looking at the resource group pivot down below, that this web screener resource group is costing a significant amount of money for me. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually click on that and add a filter for the web screener resource group. So now this is now showing me only costs that are accruing within that web screener resource group. And so again, I think someone in the chat had asked how to see costs for a specific resource group or resource. Using this filtering tool is a great way to sort of drill in further on the cost. And so for example, again, as I had mentioned, this is just the web screener resource group costs. Similarly, you have the ability to toggle what date range you're looking at these costs over. So I'm going to keep this on the current month. But I also want to call out that there's the ability as well to group by various dimensions. So let's say I filtered down to this resource group, but I want to understand what resources are actually costing me money within the resource group. That would be where a group by resource might be a great thing to take advantage of. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to group by resource, and you can see now that it looks like I've got several resources here that are all accruing costs, but it looks like there's a hosting environment that is costing significantly more money, or actually most of the money, for that resource group. So that's just a good thing to know, to understand. Let's say you wanted to reduce the cost, knowing what's the most expensive resource could be a great first step in understanding, what things you can do to maybe adjust the configurations of that resource to lower the cost moving forward. Another thing I want to call out is that you can actually change various aspects of this graph. For example, if you wanted to see a line graph or it as a column graph, that's also available to you, along with a daily view where you can see here how costs are accruing each day. So for example, the very expensive, or the most expensive resource accrued $34 on September 17th. One thing also before I move on from this, if you have any questions, a great thing that you can use within this tool is our help menu. And so this sort of has a link to our quick start tutorial. It's got an API reference if you're looking to build some automation on top of our APIs. Ability to submit feedback as well. If you've got any thoughts on this tooling that you'd like to share with us, our team would love to know them. We're always looking to improve things moving forward. We've also got the ability for you to go and diagnose and solve problems, and so that has some sort of quick common questions that customers ask, along with various troubleshooting steps that you can take in order to answer those questions. So let me go back now to cost analysis here. All right, let me change the budget that I'm looking at. Okay, so another great thing that you can do is you can change. We've got several different built-in views that are available for you in cost analysis. And one hugely helpful one is the cost by resource view. So I'm going to click on that. So this shows you a tabular view of all of the resources that are in this subscription, and they're ordered from the most expensive to the least expensive from a cost perspective. And so you can see sort of a quick view of what's the resource, what type of resource is it, where is it located, along with some of the tags that that resource has. Similarly, if you're looking to get a little bit more information, such as, you know, what meters or services are accruing the cost for this resource, you can see that if you click on the little arrow here. And so this is a great way for you to be able to get a sort of by resource tabular view of how costs are accruing for a given month. And again, if you're looking to get a larger time range here, you can adjust that using this date picker. Similarly as well, we've got, you know, so we had covered the accumulated cost view. We've also got a daily cost view, cost by service view, and an invoice details view. So let's say, let me go back to this accumulated cost view. So let's say that I have generated a view that I want to share with someone else. So I'm going to go back to this web screener resource group view that I had created previously. If I wanted to share this with someone else, I can actually do that by clicking on this share link above, which allows me to share this URL with other folks on my team who can go and see the same view that I'm looking at here. I can also save this view for myself at a later time if I want to go back and view this and not have to sort of make the same kind of not have to interact and make the same sort of drill down things each time. So that's sort of a quick discussion of cost analysis. Also now I'm going to move into the exports section of our discussion. But before that, again, if folks have any questions, feel free to ask them. Oh, one correction I want to make. Looks like my moderator just pointed this out. I had given you all the wrong email address for questions that you can send. It's actually not askcostmgmt@microsoft.com. It's askcostmanagement, management fully spelled out, at microsoft.com. So again, if you think of any questions after this session ends, feel free to send us a mail and we can answer those for you. Okay, so now moving into discussing exports. So exports can actually be accessed from cost analysis by, there, one sec actually. Okay, so exports can actually be accessed from cost analysis by clicking on this download button right here. And when that pops up, you have several things that are available to you. You can download an actual image of this chart, an Excel or a CSV of the data that was used to render this chart, or you can schedule an export of all of the cost data for a given this particular scope that we're looking at. And as I briefly mentioned before, exports can be a great solution if you have a large amount of data that your organization is looking to do some real analytics on, and maybe even integration into your own systems. This is a great tool that basically can put all of that data into a storage account for you on a recurring basis that you can then download at your leisure and integrate into Power BI. You could use Excel or various other tools to perform some analytics on it. So here you can see the exports experience. I've already gotten some exports that have previously been created, but I'll just briefly show you what are the various aspects of an export that you can configure. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to name this Atom Export. So one thing that I want to call out that's hugely helpful about this export. So I had mentioned Azure Reservations previously, and so this export actually allows you to have a view into the cost of those reservations in different ways. And so as a reservation works, you are prepaying for a VM, for example, upfront for a year. And so there's different ways that that actually can be represented within our cost management tooling. And the way we refer to that is via actual cost or amortized cost. And so, for example, if you purchased an RI or a reservation for $12,000 in January, and you wanted to look at the actual cost view of your resources, that $12,000 purchase would only show up in the month of January, and subsequent months would not show the cost of that reservation. Subsequently, though, if you're interested in looking at that reservation sort of peanut buttered across the entire duration of the reservation period, so for example, a year, then you can select this amortized cost view, which will actually allocate an $1,000 charge for you on each of those subsequent months where the reservation is active. And you've got various different export types that you can choose from, whether you want a daily, month-to-date cost export, a weekly one. Those are sort of depending on what your scenario is and what you're looking to analyze. That is so selecting it based on your scenario would be best for you. One thing I also want to call out is that exports are dumped into a storage account, and so here's where you can configure what storage account gets the data that the export creates. So I'm going to go back to the exports view. So I've got this export that's been pre-created, and this has actually dumped a file for me into a storage account, and I've gone and I've actually downloaded that file to give you an idea of what is actually available to you in this data. So you can see here that you've got a bunch of different columns that are available that can be sliced and diced in a similar fashion to how you would do in cost analysis, but you could do so using a pivot table, for example, which is what I've used here. So you can see that I've actually I've grouped things based off of the instance ID, which is sort of the fully qualified name of the resource, and then I've aggregated the cost there by resource. So this is sort of a similar cost by resource view using exports to what I had shown you previously in cost analysis. Alrighty, before I move on from exports, just want to again, if folks have any questions, feel free to ask them. Oh yeah, one thing my team wants me to mention as well is all of the functionality that I'm discussing today is available via REST API. So if you're looking to develop and programmatically use cost management, you can actually build on top of our APIs to do some of the same things that I'm showing you here. So for example, if you want to programmatically configure an export, or you want to programmatically get a pre-baked view of your costs, that's all available to you via our APIs. Also, I had discussed that amortized cost is available within our exports tool, but that's also available to you within cost analysis as well. And the way to access that is actually via this toggle here where you can switch between actual cost versus amortized cost. So that sort of wraps up some of the functionality related to cost analysis and exports. And so if I go back here to this unit here, I've sort of given a demo for you live on some of the content here that's available within our tooling. So now again, I'll give folks a second here if you I would at this point actually move on to the exercise. And so this would be a great time to try to actually do some of this analysis that I've just done in the portal on your own subscriptions. So I'll give folks a quick second to do this exercise, and then we'll move on to discuss budgets. Alrighty. So now to head back to this PowerPoint. So we've discussed, the first tenet of cost management visibility and went over cost analysis and exports. Now we're going to be discussing budgets, which specifically is getting at how to keep your organization accountable. Alrighty, so here's the budgets blade. And so this is accessible from the same subscription view that I have been using cost analysis with. And I'm going to show you how you can go through and configure a budget. So in the previous exercise, I was looking at the web screener resource group. You can see here, let's actually regenerate that real quick. So this is the web screener resource group. Let's say that that is where I've actually gone and configured that workload that I had previously done the estimate for. If let's say all of those resources are in a resource group, that would be a great thing to go and create a budget on. And so that is something that you actually can do using our budgets feature. So here shows sort of all of the budgets that have been created in this subscription so far. Let's go ahead and create a new one. Alrighty. So while this loads here, I'm going to go and give this a name. And as you can see, it's showing a chart here that sort of shows what is the cost for each month for this particular subscription. But again, I'm looking to analyze the web screener resource group. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a filter on this budget in order to get down to that web screener resource group. Alrighty, so as you can see, this chart is actually now updating to show you the costs specifically for the web screener resource group. As you can see, it's also showing what the cost is forecasted to be through the end of September and then subsequent months as well. And so you have several options that you can choose when creating a budget. You can specify a monthly budget, a quarterly, or an annual budget. Similarly, you can specify when you want this budget to start or be created and when you're looking to have it expire. And it looks like, based off of my forecast, they're recommending, or Azure is recommending, that the budget threshold be $1,154. So you can see here now that I've entered that's the threshold is actually overlaid on top of the cost here, so you can have an idea of how the budget sort of is related to the costs, both past and present and future. So I'm going to move forward here. So again, you know, this is a great tool to be able to enforce accountability on resources. So once you've set the threshold here, there's various alert conditions that you can configure in order to notify various stakeholders of the budget the costs as they're accruing. So for example, if I were to set a 90% threshold on this resource group, you can see here that that's where this threshold is located. And actually what it will do is it will go and it will email various, you know, it will email whomever you choose to get an email as a result of this budget. Another great thing that you can do within budgets is configure an action group as well to get triggered and result to a threshold being met. So an action group is essentially a great way to implement automation on top of budgets. So you can configure an action group, for example, to call a webhook in order to kick off some automation. So for example, let's say I had a webhook behind an API that went and was configured to go spin down some portion of my capacity. That could be a great way to sort of use cost as a trigger to sort of scale up and down your environments. And again, this might not be a great scenario for a production environment, but if you've got a development environment around, you could, you know, having a budget that's linked to automation to adjust the capacity could be a great solution in order to sort of keep those costs in line moving forward. So again, if anyone has questions on any of these things that I'm discussing here, feel free to ask them in the chat. I'm going to head back over, see if there's been anything else my moderators have pointed out for me to discuss. Looks like no. So that sort of concludes the accountability section. One thing that isn't actually in this learning module that I just wanted to briefly mention is sort of a great way, a big aspect of accountability is kind of understanding who is the person who is actually going to be able to have enough insight into the costs and what resources and workloads are running to be able to go make changes. And so a great way to be able to do that is to actually, let's say, you know, this web screener resource group, I'm interested in understanding who actually has been working on this web screener resource group so that I can actually go and engage them for, you know, to let's say, adjust some of the configurations to reduce the cost. A great way to do that is to utilize, you know, you can go to the resource group within Azure and actually go and see who has access to this particular resource group. And so this sort of provides a great way for you to go and identify what are various stakeholders that might be good for me to reach out to directly, you know, in order to who have the knowledge to be able to go implement changes. Because, for example, if I'm someone in finance, I might not have, you know, the wherewithal or understanding of the workloads to go, you know, if I were to go just willy-nilly turn off a workload, that might, you know, cause a lot of upstream problems. And so engaging someone in engineering or on the app team who has an understanding can be a great way to be able to also enforce accountability along with budgets. So now to head back to our presentation here. So the next tenet of cost management is optimization. And so also just want to call out, actually, before I move into optimization, that at this point, we have actually reached the conclusion of the main content that is in our Learn module. And so the subsequent things I'll be discussing are sort of just some extra tips that you can utilize. And actually, some of them have their own Learn modules in our learning path as well that can, you know, give you a little bit more of a deep dive. But actually, before I move on, I want to just give folks a second here, if you are following along in the portal, to kind of go and try to play around with configuring your own budget as I had just done. And so I'll give folks a few seconds there. Also, we'll go ahead and see if there are any additional questions. Alrighty, so now to move on into optimization. So the first aspect that I discussed for optimization that can be used is Azure Advisor. And so this similarly is available within your subscriptions blade and can be available. So I've just gone and clicked on this here to see what exactly is Azure recommending that I do in order to reduce some of my costs. And so I can see here that I actually have two recommendations that Azure is advising me to take action on. So specifically, it looks like they've identified a virtual machine that I should either right size or shut down. And so this again would be a configuration change that I can make on my environment. And it's looking like that actually could result in around $500 of savings if I were to go and take some action. It's also providing me some information on a virtual machine reserved instance that I could actually purchase as well, which would again save me almost $500. So we're looking at almost $1,000 worth of savings that Azure is kind of advising me to take action for. And so, you know, there are various different recommendations that can be very useful to go and take action for within your organization. So here, for example, you can see that it's actually identified the specific VM and is recommending that I move it, I change its SKU from a D2 to a B2. And so this is a great change. You know, this is just one example of a configuration change that can be made in order to save money. So that's just sort of a quick preview of Azure Advisor. There are other recommendations as well that are supported, such as, you know, deallocating unused IP addresses is one thing that would show up here, or express routes that aren't available or that aren't being used as well as oftentimes a recommendation that can come up. So again, I would recommend that all of your teams kind of use this tool on a semi-frequent basis to see what exactly is Azure telling me might be a smart thing to do. And again, for example, let's say I go and I see, oh, this Clancy VM is something that should be resized. That would be a great time to go, as I discussed previously, and find out who has access to that machine. And that might be a great person to sort of, verify whether or not this change can be made without having an impact on the workload. So that sort of is a quick discussion of Azure Advisor. And now I'm sort of going to move into a little bit more detailed discussion on Azure Reservations. And again, if folks have any questions about what you're seeing, feel free to ask them in the chat. So now at this point, I'm going to show you actually, it looks like there was a reservation here that was recommended to be purchased. So I'm going to show you how exactly you can go and purchase that reservation, and then what are some of the things that you should be thinking about once you've purchased the reservation to ensure that you're not it has the potential to save you money, but you want to make sure that if you're spending a bunch of money up front, that you're taking advantage fully of the capacity that's allocated as a result of that reservation purchase. So first of all, we can go here. Reservations can be accessed by searching reservations within this search box up here, or subsequently you can go to all services as well and to access reservations. So I've specifically discussed reservations as being available for virtual machines, but there are also reservations that you can purchase across many different Azure services, including blob storage, SQL database, managed disks, all of which have the ability to lead to substantial savings. And again, a key scenario that you want to make sure that you have when purchasing a reservation is that you're sure that that service will be around for a good amount of time. So as you can see here, it's looking like this is what's recommended to me in order to actually to purchase this particular reservation for this subscription. And then you can add it to your cart and then go ahead and it will prepay for VM capacity for it looks like 3 years here for a particular VM that can then be directly allocated against the charges that are accrued for a VM. So now I'm actually going to show you, for let's say I had gone and purchased a reservation, what exactly would that look like, and what are some things that I can do to sort of understand how that reservation is being used. So here I've got a different account here that's got a couple reservations. So I'm going to go here and click on this one reservation that was purchased. So one key thing to note here actually is that it looks like this reservation is actually being underutilized. It looks like it's on average only got about 40% or 45% utilization. So all of the unutilized capacity in that RI, which I guess it's looking like it's actually 53%, is wasted funds. So the idea is, if you've bought the capacity worth of 10 VMs and you're only using 7 VMs, you're not really taking full advantage of that perfect purchase benefit that you would get if you were to use everything. So it's very important to make sure that you're fully utilizing these reservations. And if you're not, it might be a good you have the ability to sort of exchange reservations and also ask for a refund for reservations as well if you find out that you're not using them. So you can see here, for example, where this reservation is actually being applied. So it looks like it's being applied across several different resources. And it looks like 71 of the hours of these resources are being used by this sort of prepaid RI. So another thing, let's say I've identified keeping track of the utilization is very important. We also have, for enterprise customers, if you have a large organization that's signed an enterprise agreement with Azure, we also have some additional functionality within Power BI. We have a template app that actually you can use to analyze RI in a little bit more in-depth of a basis. For example, and again, this is sort of, I've just opened up this template app within my own particular account, but there's, a bunch of different pages and reports that are sort of a part of this template app. And again, this is specifically if you're an Azure Enterprise customer who has, things in Azure. So for example, one of these reports here is actually showing, has the ability to show you what your estimated total savings is as a result of purchasing that reservation. So let me actually go back to that tab. So it's looking like I'm actually not saving money because of these reservations. So, I pointed out that one reservation previously that was underutilized. Similarly, it looks like there's other unused reservations that are associated with my own account that are, it's looking like it's actually not saving me money. So that would be a great, opportunity for you to go and try to either get a refund on one of those RIs or do an exchange. And so, this is sort of showing you the various reservations, how much your cost would be with RI, how much your savings are. So it looks like, for example, we've got an entire reservation here that has 0 savings, which means it's completely unused at this point. So that would be, a great thing to go investigate and figure out, either can we allocate it somewhere or should we be refunding the reservation? So yeah, that's sort of reservations kind of briefly. I can discuss some of the other pages actually on this report. You've got various other things available to you, such as, your usage by subscription. So you can see here, a pivot chart or a donut that's similar to some of the donuts that I showed you in cost analysis, which has sort of the cost by subscription name and the resource name as the pivot. And you can also see sort of the various subscriptions and how they're accruing costs. And again, this is sort of a view specific for the enterprise customers that we have out there in order to sort of see all of the subscriptions that might be associated with your enrollment. Another thing this report offers is an ability to see how many AHub licenses you're actually consuming. So for example, you can look at various resource details and you can see whether or not you have hybrid benefit enabled on those. And so again, if you've got a bunch of let's say SQL licenses or Windows licenses, using hybrid benefit can substantially reduce the costs of those resources when you are able to apply them to some of your workloads. Yeah, so that's sort of a quick discussion. Again, this template app is available to some of our enterprise customers, but we've got various tools that are available to you to help kind of allow you to analyze those costs, enforce accountability, and optimize them further. So that sort of wraps up some of the content that I have for you all today. But again, if there are any questions, feel free to ask them in the tool here. And let's see if there's any questions that my team here has posted. Let's see. Looks like no additional questions. So let me skip forward here in this presentation real quick. So before we kind of end here, I wanted to raise some additional resources that are available to you after viewing this session. We've got our ACM YouTube channel, which I've discussed previously and kind of shown you. And so that's available at aka.ms/costmgmt/videos. Similarly, we've got that learning path that I had shown you. That's at the same aka.ms link, but /learn. We've also got a Twitter account, and so that's an account where we'll post various updates and feature releases as they come out, along with tips and tricks that you all can utilize to better manage your costs. We've got a link here to our Azure Docs, so that again it can be accessed at aka.ms link with the /docs at the end. And so this is a great resource for sort of a much more in-depth, holistic, set of documentation that you can go over at your leisure. And then we've also, again, if you have any questions that pop up in your head at the end of this presentation, feel free to shoot us an email at askcostmanagement@microsoft.com. So yeah, that concludes this session. Yeah, I thank everyone for participating. I hope that this was a useful, period of time for you all to gain better understanding over the tooling that's available.